Thank you, and pleasure to be here with you in Krakow today. It's my first time visiting Poland, and it's been an awesome trip so far. As was mentioned, my name's Matt Larson. I've been with Xamarin for about 3 years, and I'm still getting used to saying I work for Microsoft now, as we were acquired a few months ago. So I will. First off, by show of hands, who has heard of Xamarin before? All right, great. Who's built a Xamarin app? A few fewer hands. And who's never heard of Xamarin before? And who thinks it's, okay, good. Oftentimes with a name like Xamarin, they think it's like a drug or some pharmaceutical company. It's not, but we're going to talk about what it is today. So first off, I just want to give a few stats, and obviously you guys all know this, but mobile's eating the world. These are my two kids. Maisie, who's 4, and Jones, who's 18 months. Maisie is a very inquisitive little girl and is always asking questions. We live in London, and one day we were traveling on the tube, and there was this advertisement here, and she said, what is that thing that he's kicking? And I explained to her that that's a phone, and she was like, well, why? How is that a phone? And it occurred to me that my kids are growing up in an entirely different world than the one that I grew up in, where phones were connected to walls and they had wires and you couldn't move around. And so I explained this to her, and she said, well, how did people get around without a phone in your pocket? And I thought that was a very good question. I don't remember how I got around without a phone in our pockets. But that's the world that we live in, and you guys are obviously familiar with this. This is the growth, or the shipments of computers, of PCs, and you'll see that kind of inching along year after year. The little peaks are when there's a new version that comes out. But then when we overlay the mobile growth on top of it, it just blows it away. I remember the first time I saw an iPhone, and it totally changed my perspective on what you could do with this supercomputer in your pocket. And obviously everybody else had the same vision, and mobile devices have taken off. So all this has led to a change in our behavior. It's incredible how many times I'm reaching into my pocket and checking my phone. People are checking their phones right now. It's a pervasive behavior that we have, and that's good. I think that it allows us to stay connected. It allows us to be more productive. But because this is a new world that we live in, we need to embrace that, and as developers, adjust and build experiences and build apps tailored to this new generation, to this new world that we live in. So we're going to talk today about Xamarin and how Xamarin enables you to do that, but wanted to just briefly go through a little bit of the history of Xamarin for those of you who may have heard it but may not have been up to speed with the latest happenings around the Xamarin office. So a brief history here. So Xamarin is actually founded in the early 2000s. Has anybody ever heard of Mono? So Mono was an open source port of .NET. This whole slide is to talk about how there's a drastic, kind of a big circle, and that the Microsoft that existed when Xamarin was, or Mono was initially founded, is much different than the Microsoft that is today. So initially Xamarin was Mono, and it was an open source port of .NET, and Microsoft wasn't too happy about that. It went through several phases, was acquired by Novell. Novell, they released their first product for iOS and then later Android. And then through a series of acquisitions and then buybacks, our founders bought back the rights to Xamarin and started the company in 2011. Xamarin at that time was a paid license. You would pay an annual subscription to develop apps in Xamarin. We kept growing, 500,000 developers in 2013, launched a new product called Test Cloud, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. We established a partnership with Microsoft. And then 2015, 2016, things really took off. We surpassed 1 million developers. We were acquired by Microsoft in March. And then at their Build conference, they announced that Xamarin was being open sourced. So this whole it's kind of ironic. Our CTO actually interviewed at Microsoft when he was early 2000s, before he started Ximian, and so he says that it's kind of a 15-year interview process with Microsoft, and he's finally passed the interview. So that's the big thing that people aren't aware about Microsoft today, is that there is a huge focus on open source. And I was just chatting with some folks at lunch. Microsoft's actually the largest contributor on GitHub to open source projects. And Xamarin has been a key part of propelling that growth forward. So this is Google Trends. You'll see kind of the explosion that happened when Microsoft announced that they were buying Xamarin, and then announced that build. And this, I think, this tweet from Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, kind of encapsulates the new Microsoft and Microsoft's vision for how Xamarin will fit into that. So any app, any OS, any developer, truly universal, right? So that's the new message, is that it doesn't matter if you're building apps for iPhone, for Android, if you're building them on a Mac or on a PC, Microsoft tools will be there, and they'll help you in whatever development environment you feel most comfortable with. Now, I wanted to share this because this was the reaction that the attendees at Build gave when Scott Guthrie announced the Xamarin open source. So if you guys feel so inclined, you can follow their reaction as well. So just 1 minute.
Now, starting today, pleased to announce we're going to be making Xamarin available at no extra charge to every Visual Studio customer.
Yes, thank you.
This includes developers using Visual Studio Enterprise Edition. This includes developers using Visual Studio Professional Edition. And this also includes developers using the free Visual Studio Community Edition. Like we've already done with ASP.NET, Entity Framework, C#, Roslyn, and the Core.NET runtime, we're also going to be making Xamarin's core platform open source and contributing it as part of the .NET Foundation.
So there we go. For those of you who weren't at Build, that was by far the longest applause that anything got. As excited as developers can get, which here we are, very excited crowd, right? That was a lot of excitement. So those were the big announcements, and that's what's important for you. That now Xamarin is part of Visual Studio in every edition, right? So you can go download the Community Edition today and get started building apps with Xamarin. So that was, as someone who my role before was trying to get people to use Xamarin, and now that they don't have to pay for it, there's a lot more people who are using Xamarin. So I'll point you to some links later where you can go get started, and then that it's open source. And you're able to contribute and be part of the community as well. So now that we've kind of told that story, I want to jump in and we'll talk about what Xamarin is. And now Xamarin is much more than just, over here on the left, the development platform. We are part of a much broader life cycle as part of Microsoft. So obviously we're building apps, and we'll talk mostly about that the remainder of my presentation. But now we fit in with the Azure platform. We allow you to integrate your apps with Azure. We have Xamarin Test Cloud, which is a way to automatically test your app on over 2,000 physical devices in our device cloud, so that you can make sure that your apps are running on all of the plethora of Android devices that exist in the world before you ship your app out to the world and have angry Android users saying it doesn't work on my phone. We allow you to iterate. We have Hockey app is part of our kind of family of products now, and Microsoft Visual Studio Team Services. And then finally, Xamarin University, which I'll mention at the end, which helps you get up to speed on this whole new platform and way of building apps. But again, I don't have a lot of time, so we're just going to spend the rest of this time talking about what Xamarin is, the Xamarin platform to build apps. So before we do that, two things. There's two challenges that we see when you're building a mobile app. The first is that it's a heterogeneous world. How many iPhones do we have in the room? All right, how many, there we go, there's a proud iPhone user. How many Android? Okay, a lot of Android. How many Windows Phone? There we go. Good, all right, fantastic. So something else, I mean, is that BlackBerry? No, okay. So it's a heterogeneous world. You can't ignore one of these operating systems. The second challenge is that users want native experiences. Anybody remember the Facebook app when it was only HTML? There we go. They had it was a one-star app. People hated the experience. Mark Zuckerberg said that the biggest mistake that they made was betting too much on HTML5. They righted their ship. They built a fully native application. Now, obviously, Facebook's the best, the number one app in the world. They do all of their advertising revenue through their mobile app. And this graph here shows the percentage of time that users spend on their phone. And you'll see that 86% is actually in apps, while only 14% is in the browser. So users want native apps, and they want them on all of the different platforms. So how do you go about doing this? How do you overcome these two challenges? We see two different groups. The first we call the siloed approach, where you have a team of Objective-C or Swift developers, you have a team of Java developers, maybe a team of .NET developers, each with their own code base, each with their own tools, and they're kind of in these silos building their own app. So it's great for users because they have a full native experience. Not so great for the developers and for the company because it becomes very expensive to introduce multiple features several different times, fix bugs multiple times in each of these code bases. So then people tend to switch and go to the opposite extreme and say, okay, forget the user. We're just going to do a write once, run everywhere approach. We'll do it in HTML5, some hybrid approach, which leads to non-native performance and to non-native UI. These are the things like the phone gaps and the app accelerators, building an app in HTML5, where it has a native container, but it's not using all of the native controls and the native APIs that Apple and Google give you. So how does Xamarin fit into all this? Xamarin enables you to build more apps faster because you're sharing more of your code across those different platforms. You're doing all of your development in C#, so you only have one tool, one skill set to worry about. And we also give you completely native UI, so that all of the APIs that Apple and Google expose, we give those to you in C#, but we give you 100% of those APIs. And finally, there's native performance, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And because of this, it's very scalable. You're able to reuse existing .NET code. You're able to share, not only code between iOS and Android, but also across all of the applications that you're building. So when we talk about native, it's a definition that gets thrown around a lot. But when we talk about native, we talk about native user interface, meaning that it's, if you're going to write to a UI button, it's that button. It's not a redrawing of some UI. You're using the actual controls that are available for iOS and for Android. And you have high fidelity API access. So again, Apple has thousands of APIs, Google the same, and they're always coming out with new ones. All we're doing at Xamarin is just taking those APIs and exposing those to you in C#. And there's literally nothing that you could do in Swift or in Java that you can't do in Xamarin. We give you one-to-one parity for all those APIs and native controls. And then finally, that performance. And I'll show you in just a second an example of this. But Xamarin apps are completely performant as well. We actually go through the same compilation process as an app that's built in Objective-C. So that's what we talk about when we're looking at a native app. Now, let me throw both of these up here. So there's kind of two approaches to building your Xamarin app. The first that you see over on my right, on your left, is the traditional Xamarin approach, where everything's done in C#, but you'll separate your back-end logic from your presentation layer. So the UI, the UX will all be built specifically for iOS, specifically for Android, specifically for Windows Phone. But all of your data access layer, your shared business logic will exist there in the shared C# backend. So given that approach, that's kind of best for UI, UX intensive applications. If you're going to build the next Facebook, that would be the recommended approach. And you're able to share, 60, 75% of your code. And we'll look at some more examples in a minute. The other is Xamarin Forms, which is an abstraction layer API that enables you to write your UI once instead of having to write it 3 times. So it's still a fully native app. It's still using the native controls, but we give you kind of a UI layer out of the box with certain controls. So if you want to do a login screen and it has a text field and a few buttons, we'll give you those buttons in Xamarin Forms API that map down to the native buttons and the native controls behind the scenes. So this approach is going to be better when you're doing POCs, if you're doing a Forms type application, because you'll be able to share and reuse more of your code. So we've seen code sharing up to 99% using the Xamarin Forms approach. And so again, just to reiterate, with Xamarin, anything that you could do in the platform-specific languages, Swift, Java, Objective-C, you're able to do with Xamarin as well. And we're always up to date. As you are very well aware, Apple and Google are always releasing new versions of their operating system. We're going through that right now with iOS 10. And so our engineers are hard at work making sure that all of those APIs that are being released are available to you the same day that Apple and Google are releasing them. And we've got a very strong track record of that. Since iOS 5, the same day that Apple releases their latest operating system, we're releasing a new version of Xamarin as well that includes all of those, includes those latest APIs. And we also support devices of the future, Google Glass, maybe. But Android Wear, new smartwatches, smart TVs, HoloLens. So our mission is to allow you to use your skills in C# and to use your code and allow it to run not only on iOS, Android, and Windows, but whatever devices will exist out there in the future. So building an app in Xamarin, you're essentially future-proofing your app and making sure that it will work going forward. So returning to performance, one of the questions we get a lot is, okay, great, Xamarin sounds awesome, but what does an app actually perform like? How does one look out in the wild? How does one feel? This was a guy, Harry Chung. He was one of the original Google employees, and he wanted to build an app, do it cross-platform, and use one of these frameworks, but he was concerned about performance. So he took all of these different cross-platform tools out there, Appcelerator, PhoneGap, Xamarin, also did it in Swift and Objective-C and Java, and he just compared performance. And the slide is a bit small, and we'll share these around later. All of his findings are online as well. But you'll see that over here on the left in blue is the iOS performance. Xamarin was just behind Swift, marginally behind Swift, so as performant. And then on Android, on the right, Xamarin actually outperformed the Java-built application. So you'll see that if you're an end user, if you're using this app built in Xamarin, there's literally no performance degradation when you're building an app with Xamarin. So his conclusion was that there must be some magic involved, and the magic is a lot of hardworking engineers. So what does this mean? Why build your app in Xamarin? Obviously, one of the reasons is you'll be able to get to market faster, and you'll be able to save time and save money along the way. This is an example kind of case study that we've put together. So if you're building the same app and you do it on iOS and Android specifically, maybe it takes 4 months, you do it with Xamarin, you can share your code so you'll be able to get to market faster, 63% less time, 68% time savings. But more importantly is what are some of our customers seeing and experiencing. So here's just a sampling of a few of our customers and the success that they've had getting the market faster. Honeywell is a great example, using 30% less code. Reed in the UK is a job listings app, and they're able to get the market faster because they're reusing twice the amount of code. So I wanted to end by sharing just one more customer success story. This is Alaskan Airlines, and they're using the entire life cycle that I mentioned, and then I'll wrap it up after this video. So enjoy this video.
Airlines is an 83-year-old $6 billion startup company. Our stated goal is to be the easiest airline to fly by 2017. And so as we invest in innovation, as we invest in tools, whether it's mobile, whether it's cloud, we think about how is that differentiating us in the marketplace and how is that making us an easier airline for customers to experience.
As Alaska Airlines developer, we are very adventurous. We love to try new things, and we always want to see what out there in the consumer market and see how we can bring it back to the company. And we want to take that knowledge, apply to our operational application so that we can improve our airline to become an even better airline.
The airport, the hotel, the airplane are our employees' office, and they're our frontline employees. And so we see mobility as a key to enabling that connection with the customer. Hopper was created to enable our employees to figure out day of flight, what flights they can get onto and what destinations they can go to. We built the Hopper app to make it really easy for our employees to have that information in the palm of their hand.
Most companies are struggling with trying to pick a device to develop on, and whether it's the iOS platform, Android platform, Windows platform, we have an opportunity to pick Xamarin and not to choose a specific endpoint device. You can actually adopt Xamarin and code once and deploy to all tools and all endpoint devices.
This allows us to really focus on the features, but not like individual platform languages.
It is a native experience. We are able to integrate things like Touch ID into our apps, push notifications, all these native experiences that allow us to deliver value quickly.
Not only is it an acceleration for core development, it also has extensions to deliver better quality from a testing perspective.
We use Test Cloud to be able to test it on many different devices. We're leveraging automation to run through the suite of integration tests all the way to deployment. You don't have to think about that stuff anymore. You just think about what's the experience that you want to deliver to your users.
The feedback that I'm getting from my developers is really, really positive. The teams are excited at the rate and pace and velocity at which they're able to deliver solutions.
It's just a great feeling that I can help others with technology, with my knowledge.
And there's nothing better to see when someone slides and puts a 5-star rating and puts the feedback and says, oh my gosh, you guys just delivered this awesome feature, thank you so much. It makes my life better.
Awesome. So that's one example of the many, many customers that are delivering awesome apps with Xamarin. That's an enterprise use case. We have a lot of other use cases as well, and actually some of the most interesting apps are built by smaller developers, indie developers. There was a lot to go through today, and I try to just highlight the most important things. I'll be sticking around after to chat more. But one thing before I leave, on the Accelerate piece, Xamarin University, so it's our online training platform that I mentioned. We have 70 plus courses that are offered there. Entry level, getting started with Xamarin, but also digging deeper into the iOS and the Android specific development. There's a free self-guided course that you can, or self-guided track that you can go through. I think it has 8 courses. So a great way to get started and learn more. So here's just a couple links. There's a free download of Xamarin. You can get started and use that. And then getting started with Xamarin University as well. So thank you very much, and looking forward to chatting with you all later on at the conference. Thanks.